There was a bombshell dropped on the Hamilton mayor's race this week. Yes, we found out that Fred Eisenberger is not going for a fourth term as mayor. That kind of tied to his exit announcement was the prospect of Andrea Horwath leaving as an MPP and dropping into the Hamilton mayor's race. So the person who did know that, well, at least thought that Fred was not going to run again, was pretty sure about it, and said so here on the OShow, which makes him a bit of an Nostradamus, is Mark Cripps. Mark Cripps, you're on the program because you called it a year ago when many of us didn't think that Fred would ever leave. So what was your response when you saw the announcement yesterday?
I just had a sense. I could feel it by looking at him, looking in his eyes, looking at the way he was responding to issues, that he was, running the clock, and that he was going to, end his term and bow out when the time was right. I think he waited till the right time. And I think it's great that he is giving other candidates plenty of time to, gather their steam and get their profile.
I appreciate that, but I do not appreciate somebody leaving and not addressing Sewergate or covering up the Red Hill report or the harm done to members of our marginalized community. I don't think that we should gaslight the city and just say, oh, you decide to retire, good timing, move on. I think he's leaving at a strategic time before the rest of the Red Hill stuff comes out. I wouldn't want to run on Fred's record if I were him. So he's not running, so who cares?
I didn't get the reference to Andrea, and maybe that's just because I think it would be a really bad decision for her to run as mayor. Could she possibly transcend, from that, scrappy, opposition leader into a mayor who's, ready to work with the premier? That's why I think, at a time when, so many groups like I Elect and others are calling for, new ideas, changing of the old guard. I mean, I see Andrea's old guard.
She was also on council back in the day, so maybe not during the time of Sewergate and the Red Hill and these huge scandals, but she certainly has a legacy of having been a Hamilton councillor. And some people have said, well, you know what, actually she's got provincial connections, and Patrick Brown was able to work with Doug Ford despite their history. So wouldn't Andrea have more sort of understanding of the provincial, mechanisms, and that would help Hamilton? Some people have said, what Hamilton needs is a scrappy person to come back in. And if there are still some old guard counselors around that horseshoe, Andrea could get them into, like she did back in the day. She knows the culture. She knows the issues. She knows the city. She would be able to get them to work together or at least keep them from some of the shenanigans we've been seeing. When we put out what we have heard to be the top 4 candidates at this stage, 2 have announced, 2 are heavily rumored. Andrea Horwath, Bob Bertina, who has announced, David Christopherson, who, people think he's looking at it if Andrea doesn't, especially, and Keanin Loomis has announced. So we had, as of the time I'm reading this, 704 OShow viewers and others have responded. And Andrea Horwath sits at 37%, Bob at 6%, David Christopherson at 7%, and Keanin at 50%.
Personally, I mean, you got trounced in a provincial election. It would seem to be coming across as a consolation prize to me. And I think voters would see it that way. And, I think it's time to step outside and let new voices come to the table. This is what this election is supposed to be about. New voices, not old voices that are trying to be new again.
I did put out an op-ed months ago saying we don't need a recycled mayor. And right. I was referring to Bob Bertina versus Fred. And Andrea's not a recycled mayor, but she certainly is a politician coming in for possibly recycling, right? You say this is supposed to be about change. Is that just something that some of us political watchers in Hamilton want and are pushing the narrative of this has to be a change election, we can't take it anymore? Do you think that is something shared by the broader population of Hamilton? Do they all feel this sense of pent-up frustration for the scandals and the wasted money and the high property taxes and et cetera, et cetera?
I think there's a spirit of change, and maybe I live in a bubble. Maybe we all do. Maybe we live in a bubble and we just think it's real. But are people COVID pandemic weary? Are they just, so cynical about everything in life that they've just disengaged from politics? Will we end up with the same old guard? That is a frighteningly true prospect.
Thanks so much, Mark, as always, for being one of the voices that people trust on the issues they care about. Kojo Damptey is going to tell us what it's like to run against Terry Whitehead and what it's like, especially in Ward 14. I think really fascinating stuff coming up on the O Show. Kojo, you've got a long history with Councillor Whitehead from before you were a candidate running in his race. What are your thoughts on the latest allegations or findings that have come out? I mean, there's a recommendation he be docked 45 days pay.
For a number of us that live in Ward 14 or that have lived in Ward 14, this is not a surprise. This is how he's behaved. I remember during the 2018 election, my family supported Brian Wilson, who ran. And when Councillor Whitehead came to canvass in our neighborhood, he told my father-in-law to take that sign down because this was his ward, right? So I think for a number of residents, we have known that this is how Councillor Whitehead has behaved, and now the general Hamilton public is getting to see how he's been behaving towards a number of residents across Ward 14 and Hamilton in general.
Okay, so Kojo, I got to back up because I've heard a lot of stories in this town over the years, but I haven't heard that one. I mean, I've heard about signs being pulled out after dark during campaigns. I've heard about people trashing other candidates, but you're telling me that Councillor Whitehead actually told them to pull another candidate's sign out because it was his ward, as in like an entitlement, like you couldn't challenge him kind of
Yes,
vibe?
yes. And so these are some of the stories that we've heard, and this is why also Brian Wilson ran against him in 2018 because Brian wanted to start a neighborhood association in the West Cliff neighborhood to bring community together to talk about residents' issues. And Councillor Whitehead refused and again said he's not going to allow this in his ward, right? So I think this is the kind of behavior and the kind of uh, uh, um, I guess, disregard for residents. And that is why we are seeing a groundswell of Ward 14 residents saying we need to do better. And by the way, he is basically an absentee counselor. He's not responding to residents' email. For the last month or so, I've been getting emails from many residents, and I've been dealing with some of the things that they are facing in their ward. So we're hearing that they need better representation, and they haven't been hearing from the counselor. And again, residents need better representation and someone that's going to listen to their concerns and issues.
What approach are you going to take that you think will be different from Terry's? What kind of commitments are you making? What is your vision going to be for the residents of Ward 14 and for the broader city?
Yes, one of our key platform points is investing in our neighborhoods. As we've heard, there are a number of residents in different neighborhoods that want neighborhood councils. There are 9 neighborhoods in Ward 14. And so, if I'm elected councillor, I'm going to establish neighborhood councils where residents can get together and talk about the issues that they are facing in their neighborhood. And then, in addition to that, we would then establish a ward council that allows for some of those issues to feed up to the ward council. And then those are things that I can bring to the council table, whether it's during budget deliberations, whether it's during capital infrastructure discussions, whether it's about our environment here in the city. So those are the things that we are going to do. We are also going to invest in our parks. We have a heat warning for today and tomorrow, and there are some parks that do not have water fountains. There are some parks that do not have splash pads. So these are things that we want to see in our wards, in our parks, and we want to ensure that residents are engaging in a civic way. They have the solutions, they know the issues. It's not incumbent on one individual, the councillor, to decide what goes where in which neighborhood. So those are some of the things that we're going to do to ensure that neighborhoods are involved in municipal government.
So are you suggesting here on the OSHO, Kojo, that if you do become elected as a councillor in Ward 14, you won't own the ward? You'll have the citizens engaged in the ward. They'll be able to bring up concerns and you'll listen?
Yes, it is not my ward. I'm serving. If I win, I'll be serving the needs and wants of all residents in Ward 14. So I would never ever say that this is my ward.
Well, let me ask you this question, because an OShow viewer just posed it to me on Twitter as I was about to talk to you. And they would, they appreciate that we're talking to new candidates in some of these wards, but they would like to know if you were in council and there was an in-camera meeting and the legal team at the council or for the city gave advice to council about how to vote or not vote on an issue, would you listen to that legal advice intended to protect the city corporate, or would you listen to your own values and to the concerns of your residents when you're forming your decision about how to vote?
I believe in those situations, every situation is different. Every situation has different context. If we're talking about the Coots situation, definitely I would make sure that the public has the information that they need. So I think every situation has its context, but I would always put the public's interest at the forefront, as opposed to receiving legal jargon and what have you. So my first duty is to the residents of Ward 14 and the residents of Hamilton.
So, Kojo, when you were on the OShow last time, you talked about the 5 things that you would like to see change as a result of the municipal election. So let's just have a quick look at it now, and then you can tell me on the other side whether or not these remain sort of the 5 big picture priorities, or after a month of going door to door in your ward, maybe any of that has changed a little bit. So let's take a quick look.
The 5 things, definitely number one is housing, affordability, our democracy, systemic racism, and then what I would classify as a re-education of our political polarization.
That what you still see as your 5 priorities, or do you have more ward specific priorities that you want to share as part of your platform?
I think the one key thing was housing. That's the big issue, and I wanted to share a story from one of the residents that took some time to talk to us, and they were a senior couple. And when I knocked on their door, they actually spent. I spoke to them for 20 minutes, and one of the things that they talked about was that they know that they are going to have to sell their house. They know that when they sell their house, they're going to get a sizable return, but they wanted to sell their house because they wanted to move into a rental unit. And they were saying there are no rental units on the West Mountain because they didn't want to move downtown. They just wanted to stay on the West Mountain because they have lived on the West Mountain for 40 years, right? So then when we are talking about housing, if you remember, I talked about how we are missing the middle. So again, we need rental units, affordable rental units. We need different options for housing. And that is a classic case of where a senior couple is saying that, hey, look, I want to move into a rental apartment during my retirement, and they do not have these options on the West Mountain. So housing, definitely a crucial point.
Somebody said to me recently, if they were going to run against you in Ward 14, all they would do if they were Terry Whitehead is to bring up some of the platforms you've taken in the past, especially as the head of the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, the defund the police, the sort of comments you made around how the mayor was dealing with racialized people. You have spoken loudly and clearly on a number of things, Kojo, that people can find controversial. What do you do if Terry or another competitor in Ward 14 decides to make you a single issue candidate on some of those other things?
All those things that have raised are not controversial issues. When we are talking about police accountability, we can agree that we want police accountability. A couple of weeks ago, the Toronto Police Department found that there's overt racial discrimination and had to apologize, right? So if those are the things that you're going to be discussing, I do not think that I haven't said anything that people wouldn't say we should ask for accountability from our police officers. We should also look at how we spend money because we have an infrastructure deficit. We don't have things in our parks. People are complaining about our roads. Barton Street is the worst road. Upper James was also on the top 5. So again, if you're looking at if we want to save residents, the the property taxes that they are paying. We need to look at all things on the table. So I think those are things that I've said in the past. I still stand on those things, and asking for police accountability is something that we can all agree on, regardless of what position you might take.
And if you look at a study that just came out, Hamilton is in the top 5 cities in North America in terms of a lack of affordability when you put our wages against what we're paying for things. So that's a serious concern for a whole lot of voters on the mountain, if not everywhere in Hamilton.
Yes, and I have heard that at the doors. And this is what I say: if if our property taxes are high, let's look at how we spend our money, right? Does the city give residents a total amount of money that they spend on consultants, right? We're seeing a Red Hill Valley inquiry where consultants were paid and we didn't even listen to what they had to say. So we have to start looking at how we spend our money. We had a provincial gas tax of 30 million, and our council divided it amongst themselves, where they could have used that money to invest in our transit system. I'm here on the mountain that, yes, there are some people that disagree with LRT, but the reason they disagree with LRT is because they want a better transit system up on the mountain. So are we investing such provincial gas tax and federal gas tax in our transit system up on the mountain? And those are the things that we can do without increasing property taxes. Spending the money better and not wasting it on consultants and other frivolous things that past councillors have spent your property taxes on.
You mentioned the Red Hill Valley inquiry, and I hope everyone in Hamilton is watching it closely. They made decisions as a council over the years to not deal with that report and to not deal with what they knew they needed to. And now we are looking at a possibility of 22 lawsuits, separate lawsuits. There's a big story in the paper today coming at the city of Hamilton, the taxpayers. There's one message, if there is one, that you want people in Ward 14 to hear from you as they consider your candidacy against somebody who they know very well, who has been there a long time. And what do you want the broader city that watches the OShow to understand about the kind of counselor you'll be for the bigger city?
Look, my position is that I'm here to listen to residents. I've knocked close to 2,000 doors since May 2nd. And one of the things that we're hearing is they want a Hamilton that listens to them. They want a Hamilton that is building a future for uh, our young folks. They want a Hamilton that is inclusive, that is participatory. So those are the things that I'm committed to. All the platform points on my platform: transit, our neighborhoods, the environment, speaking about reconciliation on National Indigenous Day here. Those are things that are going to make our city better. Quite frankly, the current council hasn't been around, hasn't provided a vision for Ward 14, and has become an obstacle, not only at council, but also to cater to the needs of residents here. So for me, I'm here to listen. I'm here to work for folks, and I can guarantee everybody that I will be as transparent as possible. And I've done that. Even when I'm canvassing, I tell people that I'm canvassing, and people are happy that I'm in their neighborhood. So those are things that I'm going to do, and we really want to build an inclusive Hamilton where everybody's needs are met, whether you're a senior, whether you're a young one, whether you use cars, public transit, whatever it is, because we can all coexist together. And those are the things that I'm looking to bring to the table and listen to Ward 14 residents.
And are you from Ward 14?
So I've lived in Ward 14 for over a decade. Right now, I live right at the border of Ward 14. I live exactly 400 meters from Ward 14. For those of you that really want to know, but if you talk to any community organization here in Ward 14, they know me. I'm involved. I'm present. Uh, and so that's what I'm telling people. I've always been present. There was a fire in Gilkson. I was there. We've talked to community folks. I've worked with community organizations on the mountain, and I can say none of the candidates have done any of that, including the councillor. So, do you want somebody that's present and participates, or do you want somebody that's just going to fly in, or somebody that's been an absentee councillor for 19 years?
Well, it's a big question for the people of Ward 14. I know that you always take the time to talk here on the OShow and listen to our audience. So I've already seen that from you, Kojo. And, good luck. It's going to be a long, hot summer. And everyone out there in Ward 14 and across the city, please stay safe in the heat wave, in the pandemic. And please stay involved with this election. Pay close attention to it. Every vote matters, right? It's just because someone's been in a job for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's their ward. We can all still vote on October 24th. And if you're liking this content, want more of it, just subscribe on YouTube and we'll keep getting it to you. Thank you so much, Kojo Damptey, for being on the OShow and also for stepping up and running for office.
Thank you.